I'd like to call this meeting to order. May we have a roll call, please?
Dr. Bofi,
Here.
Mr. Castile,
Here.
Dr. Davis,
Here.
Ms. Ellis,
Here.
Mr. Garvey,
Here.
Ms. Holloway,
Here.
Mr. Mellering,
Here.
Mr. Morris,
Here.
Ms. Orange-Jones, Ms. Orange-Jones is not present, Mr. Rock,
Here.
Ms. Boucher.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you. Thank you. What's our first item?
Is to approve the agenda, but we have an amendment to the agenda.
All right. According to revised statute 42:19, unanimous approval of the members present is required to amend the agenda. Is there a motion to amend the agenda? Yes, Mr. Mellon?
I move to amend the agenda to include the following item: consideration of resolutions regarding school safety officers.
And we have a second by Ms. Holloway. Prior to any vote on the motion to take up a matter not on the agenda by the public body, there shall be an opportunity for public comment on any such motion. In accordance with revised statute 42:14, so we'll ask if there's any public comment on it before we take a vote. All right, let's take a roll call vote. Well, I'll pause, so I need to get public comment on revising the agenda.
Yes.
Okay. I'm waiting to see if there's any public comment before we revise the agenda. I'm going to struggle with my back to the audience as a principal. You never do this, right? So, okay, Ms. Boucher, I'm counting on you to watch my back, right? Because I know what I'm talking about. I don't even do this in restaurants. So I think I'll make it, but, all right. So there's all right, no public comment on that, and so we'll need to take a roll call vote on the motion to amend the agenda. Roll call, please.
Dr. Bofi,
Yes.
Dr. Bofi votes yes, Mr. Castile,
Yes.
Mr. Castile votes yes, Dr. Davis.
Yes.
Dr. Davis votes yes, Ms. Ellis.
Yes.
Ms. Ellis votes yes, Mr. Garvey.
Yes.
Mr. Garvey votes yes, Ms. Holloway.
Yes.
Ms. Holloway votes yes, Mr. Mellering.
Yes.
Mr. Mellering votes yes, Mr. Morris.
Yes.
Mr. Morris votes yes. Ms. Orange-Jones is not in attendance. Mr. Rock.
Yes.
Mr. Rock votes yes. Ms. Boucher.
Yes.
Ms. Boucher votes yes. Motion passes.
Thank you. What's next?
Next is approval of the agenda.
Is there a motion to approve the agenda? Thank you, Mr. Rock, second by Ms. Davis. And is there any objection? Hearing none, motion passes. And what's next?
I assume we're going to leave that item to the end. Yeah. Next is consideration of an update report regarding the legislative process for the Louisiana 2023 regular legislative session. Need a motion to receive.
Thank you, Mr. Mellering, second by Dr. Davis.
Okay, so we have not held a meeting like this in many years. I don't know, Shan, when was the last time that a meeting like this was held specifically for legislation? A long time ago, yeah. And so thanks to Dr. Davis's wisdom, we are here this morning with an opportunity to preview the legislative session. We are excited about the upcoming session, and we are thankful for some of the educational wins that have happened over the last few sessions, and are really looking forward to this upcoming year. Mr. Melanson, who does our legislative affairs and policy work, will be our employee, so to speak, on the ground every day at the Capitol, doing his best to update you all, working hand in hand with the officers of the board to make sure that they certainly get real-time updates as much as possible on what is happening at the legislature. And the purpose of today's meeting is just an opportunity for you as members to formally, in a collaborative way, discuss your principles as we go into this legislative session, to discuss any values that you may have around particular bills, belief she may have around any particular bills as we go into this session. And so we look forward to engaging in that alongside of you, supporting you today. But I would remind you, this is your meeting as members to make decisions on things you think are most important as we enter this legislative session. And so with that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Lonsall to make some opening remarks and go into his presentation.
Thank you, Dr. Bromley. Good morning, members. Ethan Melanson, Executive Director of Governmental Affairs for the Department of Education. I'm really excited to be in front of you this morning for the first time talking about legislative things solely. We've touched on it in previous meetings, but this time we're going to be able to do a deep dive on the process, on some of the bills that have been filed, and then also on some of the guiding principles that were put together in collaboration with BESE. So to start off, I thought it'd be really important to give you basically an overview of the legislative session, both from its inception all the way through to our process that you approved the last month. So to begin, what is legislative session? So I'm going to give you a little bit of a history lesson. So in 1974, the Louisiana Constitution mandated that they have sessions where they come together, pass laws. I don't have to give you that full background on those things. However, it's important to know that there's two types of sessions. There are fiscal sessions, which happen in odd-numbered years, and there are non-fiscal sessions, which happen in even-numbered years. We are heading into a fiscal session. What's important about a fiscal session, they are shorter. So they're not as long as the general sessions, which tend to be about 3.5 months. They usually start in the middle of March and end in June. This year we're starting obviously on Monday, so we're starting in April, ending in June as well. But so it's shorter, it's only focused on fiscal bills. So what is a fiscal bill, you may ask? Fiscal bills are anything that raises revenue, taxes, or deals with anything where the state is collecting money or levying taxes. They are allowed, the legislators, to file 5 non-fiscal bills. So that's the only bills that they can do. They call them general bills. This session, most of education bills fall within that general non-fiscal status. There are a few that are on our tracker that are fiscal in nature. However, most of them are just general bills. Outside of these two session types, there's of course extraordinary sessions, which are called by the legislature or by the governor. So what's the agency's role when it comes to legislative session? The first thing we do is we provide information on proposed bills and how they impact education in Louisiana. So it's very important to understand that the department as an agency, separate from BESE, cannot have positions on bills. We are barred from that by state law. So we don't take positions. When we go to the table, we are providing information only, so that is under a white card. Something else that we do is we present a package of bills for consideration that advance the agency and BESE's priorities. So in a couple slides, you'll see what those priorities are and that package is for this legislative session. Remember I mentioned how the department can only have white cards, right? So we can only provide information. When it comes to BESE's positions, through what you approved the last month, you authorized me to present your positions at the table. So I represent you across the street at the Capitol. By doing that through a motion like you did last month, it allows me to be able to speak on your behalf. So you will see me put in a red card or a green card, but it will always say Ethan Melanson representing BESE. And when I go to the table, I make sure to switch my hats out to say I'm representing BESE, I'm authorized to represent BESE. When it's usually just answering questions, I'll go under a white card, where I will go ahead and discuss the impacts that the legislation may have on education systems, on the way we do business, or the agency as a whole, whenever I'm at the Capitol. We also provide unbiased, accurate, and honest calculations on the cost of proposed legislation. So these are called fiscal notes. If you ever look at a bill or a piece of legislation that's filed, it will have an attached fiscal note. That's how much it's going to cost to implement the law if it's passed. So the Legislative Fiscal Office sends us a request. We have 48 hours now, not 72 anymore, 48 hours to turn it around. Very quick timeline, including on weekends. But we have to turn around and share a true and honest cost of how much implementing something like that would cost. and that's attached to the bill as it goes across the street. Usually, it's not just our calculations that go into fiscal notes, it's also other agencies and their costs that would go into it as well. So what we send across the street to the legislature and the fiscal office is not always what ends up coming out in that fiscal note. So it's important that we realize that as we go through the process, and you're looking at bills and paying attention to how much these things are going to cost. The other thing that we do as an agency is to educate legislators on existing policies, programs, and outcomes. So as people are weighing the options of legislation and changing something, a lot of times they want to know, well, what are we doing already and what are the outcomes from those things? So how they want to evaluate basically our programs. So I provide information on that to them when they ask at the table. They may ask outside of it. Year round, I'm always getting questions about different programs, Steve Carter Literacy Program, other things that the legislature has implemented over the years. And then the last thing, and probably one of the most important things that our office does when it comes to the legislature, is respond to constituent and legislative requests. So year round, I'm getting requests left and right from legislative aides and also legislators themselves around a range of topics, from CCAP to certification to specific questions about funding, or it could also be around programs that we do, or issues and complaints that constituents have that they've come to their legislators about when it comes to education. In a lot of those situations, we help guide them through the labyrinth that is state government and help them to find the answers that they're looking for and assist them. Any questions about the agency's role? I wanted to pause here. Yeah, so another thing that I'll share, and we'll discuss this a little bit when we go over the bills, is that a lot of times during filing, they will seek the input from the department as they're filing bills, so as they're crafting legislation. So we try to lend a hand and to help them to do it in the most, either the least disruptive way if they want to get it across, and also a way that fits into existing things that we're doing that incorporates their thought process in there. So there's a lot of times where you may hear at the Capitol someone say, I worked with the department on this bill. Does not mean that we gave them support or blessed it or anything like that. It just means that they had a question and we are, as a state agency, required to help them with that to make sure that they're doing the best when they are crafting their legislation. Yes, ma'am.
Can you tell me a little more about the process that you go through for determining what the department's package of bills is going to contain, and then also how you work with BESE in terms of figuring out BESE's support for what those priorities are going to be and the role of BESE in it? Like, so is that confined only to the officers, or because I don't remember us like as a BESE board talking about those things. I just like some information.
Yes, ma'am. I'll go ahead and I'll share that process a little bit. So during the filing process, because of the timing that we have BESE meetings, it gets a little hairy of how we can get these things across. But what we do is we start, and you'll see there's a timeline. I think it's next. No, that's the dates. Okay. The timeline starts really for me in November, so that far out, talking with our office staff of what are the agency things that need to happen. So every agency has bumps in statute that we have to work out or work around. For instance, certification this year, we knew we had a backlog. We had some things we had to work through with that, so we worked on those things. And so those program offices bubble up their issues and concerns to us. We then take that with our executive team at the department and we start prioritizing them and putting them in a list of what needs to happen. Then we look at our agency goals of what we want to accomplish and what we want to do. And we take ideas and thoughts of how we can move the needle on education together. Those are then brought to BESE officers. So this year, because of kind of the late turnover in BESE officers, we had to do it kind of with both sets of officers. So we saw input, we talked to them about what ideas we want to bring in concept. As those bills, we sought out the authors and then we worked on it that way. So officers gave us kind of the stamp of approval to go forward, and then we bring it here to you to discuss them and to move forward on them. Because right now, the important thing to know is that the session has not started. The session starts on April 10th. So we are ahead of the game when it comes to talking about this. Usually we don't talk about these things until the first week of session when it comes to the full discussion. And usually that's just with the officers. But that's the process we went through this year. It's always tricky each year, kind of changes a little bit depending on the length of filing and the types of bills that we have to bring. But we always go to seek the blessing of the BESE officers at the time.
I just wonder, kind of in the future, if BESE might not want to think about in the fall, having a discussion about issues that have been raised since the previous legislative session that we think might need to be addressed, right, with the department's package of bills, so that maybe, because I think it's great that they're being proactive in thinking about the department needs, but maybe there is an opportunity for BESE as well to think about the concerns that have been raised over the during the year that we might think matters as well. Like if there shouldn't be an explicit time when we discuss that, so that we don't like let it go too far, right? Like that we're past that point where we can work with legislators or have the department work with legislators about something that we're interested in. I mean, that won't really matter for me because I'll be gone, but that might be important to think about just in advancing things that BESE thinks matters as well. Just a thought.
Is there a particular time in which the department starts to think about what their package looks like, and that maybe BESE can sort of track that process?
Yeah, so we have, as Dr. Davis talked about, from one legislative session to the next, I mean, I have a rolling item list that just kind of keeps going. So knowing that there was only 5 bills allowed per author this year, and it's an election year, which, adds a second layer of people wanting to do things for their districts, and taking on certain types of bills, we had to prioritize the top bills that we needed to bring to the legislature at that time. In a general session, that would be a lot easier to be able to accomplish those things and to do that. So I'm happy to take those notes and to implement something similar to that next year. But it's usually the November timeline is when I start gearing up for the session and understanding our priorities that we need to bring. And then from November until the filing deadline is working on concept and then bill drafting and the authors and those things.
I probably should know the answer to this, but was there ever a legislative committee of BESE or a particular committee that was assigned throughout the year to work alongside the department to do what you're describing?
Yeah, I think Ms. Davis would be the best one to answer that. I know that there was one. I don't know how long ago or how long it was active, but I think Shan can probably answer.
Yeah, there was a legislative committee, like there's Administration and Finance Committee and Educator Effectiveness Committee. I'm not sure that they necessarily vetted bills, but they were responsible for that committee, like you all are responsible for your committees. So there was, yes. I think 2013 was when we dissolved, 2012, 2013 was when we dissolved that committee.
Yeah, that was also last year we did principals,
Yes.
and it was also last year that we did similar to a meeting like this, so everything kind of
We
changed.
revised our committee structure. We had 7 committees before, so we had a lot more. And we met every month as well, every month.
Do you recall why it was dissolved?
I think for the reasons that we've talked about, that it was a lengthy meeting, it was, there was a lot of disagreement and it didn't really accomplish that much at the time. So.
Mr. Garvey, you
3
were
days.
on the board
We
when,
used to meet for 3 days. and
okay.
We decided to streamline.
Chad,
So BESE met for 3 days every
2
month?
days of committee meetings and then 1 day of the full board meeting.
And we had 7 committees and 2 retreats.
And most BESE members took off of work the day after that 3rd day.
Because the 3 days were so exhausting, I usually need a nap after our second day.
Was BESE then more productive?
No. Which is why we thought we could streamline.
Yeah, we did a cleanup of agendas and did away with a lot of reports that weren't necessary. Yes.
Can this be a standing item, maybe the legislative affairs of maybe administration and finance, so that it's something that's regularly marked on our agenda for consideration as the department works on its agenda? In other words, this is a great presentation. I've now heard it for the second time. Thank you. Mr. Melansau was kind enough to speak to my education law and policy class and did a wonderful job. But is this something that maybe as you're working through your agenda, your Department of Education that at least reporting to us, here's what's going on, here's what we're thinking about as we work our way through the year to the next session.
Yeah, definitely, that's something that we can move on and talk about. I know usually throughout the year, we have a legislative update that's on there, usually from January until at least August. And then the other months, I don't think we have an update item, but I don't see a problem.
There is a category for that.
Yes, there is a category for it.
It does sound like in the discussion that October might be a critical time, right? Because if you're gonna start working in November, that if the board would come together and get an update in October about the things that you wish might have been addressed during the legislative session or were addressed, but whatever might have been missed. So it seems like October might be a critical time for BESE. I do think January, February, March is also relative to session starting this time of year, but it seems like should be something more around October that gives members an idea of what to anticipate or even starts conversations about what we're going to be working towards.
Yes, ma'am. And then also, just because that little legislative item isn't there, we still talk about the needs of the department through legislation, throughout like policy changes. For instance, when all the certification changes happen, we noticed that the senator who passed the bill for all the sweeping changes to certification had accidentally removed the GPA flexibility that BESE had been given. So we talked about the need for that, but it was just during a policy discussion, not necessarily on an update item, but that would be clarified through an update item that would be on the agendas.
I have a question about the fiscal note, because I get a copy of that,
You do.
I'll request to. When the fiscal note affects the districts, where do you get those numbers from? Do you respond on their behalf, or do they go to the districts?
So it's a little different each time. The legislative fiscal office will ask us, most of the time, we are responding to the cost that it would incur to the department and to the agency, because that's what we're requested of. We will sometimes tell the legislative fiscal office, like, this would have an impact on local districts. You should probably see where that would come from. A lot of times, I believe they reach out to the School Boards Association, the Superintendents Association, and they provide a fiscal impact as well from their ideas of their membership. So we usually alert them and say this will have an impact on local districts or a profound impact on local districts, and then they seek out the local district impact. But usually we know a high number or a roundabout, but we're not allowed to report that because really it is just the cost incurred to the state at that time, not the district.
Do that research.
We sometimes will do some of the research, if we know it definitely will impact them, we'll do that research and provide it to the fiscal office, but usually they will additionally go to the School Boards Association and those folks. Because they understand the cost impact more than we would, to be honest.
Mr. Garvey?
Yes, while we were talking about legislative updates, do we have an item on our April agenda for an update?
Yes, sir, you do.
Okay, thank you.
During the session, whenever BESE meets and right after the session, we usually have legislative updates that last up until we finish out the policy updates that are required by statute at that point.
We can keep rolling.
Okay, so moving on from the agency's role, we're going to talk about important session dates. So session convenes at noon, the Constitution mandates, on Monday, April 10th, 2023, and it is final adjournment, sine die, is no later than 6 p.m. on Thursday, June 8th, 2023. You'll see the different boxes that are laid out here. A lot of these boxes are already past the date, right? So request deadlines, they have different levels of requests based on the type of bill, the schedule of bill that is being introduced. So constitutional amendment request, so that's asking a legislator's ask to the staff to draft a bill, was on March 29th at noon, and then all the other bills were on the same time, but at 5 o'clock. So they had 6 more hours to do it, 5 more hours. And then you have your pre-filing deadline. So this is when it actually shows up. This is usually done 2 days later. It gives staff 2 days to write an entire bill. That's why you should always get your request in early, because if it's the last minute, then they don't have a lot of time to research to put into your bill, and they're going to put exactly what you will ask for in the bill. So on March 31st was the pre-filing deadline. The important thing to know about this pre-filing deadline in the fiscal year is that Your general bills, after the pre-filing deadline, you cannot file another general bill. It can only be a fiscal bill after this point. So all the general bills, the ones that don't raise taxes or touch revenue, those things, had to have been filed by March 31st, which was on Friday. So that's how you have your tracker today. So on Friday, I compiled everything that was filed, and you have the most up-to-date. We are not expecting any more of these bills because of that deadline. There may be a few more fiscal bills that will be filed, which is like tax credits, those types of things. And the last day for those to be filed is going to be the request on April 18th at 6 p.m. and the introduction on the floor of the chamber originates at 6 o'clock on April 19th. So we will continue seeing, though, there's no cap on the amount of resolutions that are passed. So resolutions are legislative instruments that do not, other than the MFP, that does not have the force and effect of law. It's an urgent request or a direct to us, where we can then, usually it's study resolutions for us to study something or send a report in, or urging us to do something. You'll see that a lot towards the end of session when bills start to not make it across the finish line. Mostly they'll turn into study resolutions, and that adds to our always growing list of studies and reports that we do at the department. So another important date to remember is the 42nd legislative date. This is the 2/3 rule. So on Monday, June 5th at 6 p.m., anything to be required to be taken up in the opposite chamber will require 2/3 of that chamber to be heard. So last year that came into play. The chambers just didn't want to send any more bills across after that day. There's a select handful that were allowed to go across. So every vote will take 2/3 at that point. That's usually the death nail for your legislative instruments that have issues, because to reach that 2/3 threshold is pretty high in the chambers. And then, of course, the last date that's important is the 2023 act effective date. So everything that is passed in the session and signed by the governor or lapses his signature becomes effective on August 1st of 2023, unless the act says upon signature or lapse of gubernatorial action. Usually when that happens, the minute the governor signs it or the time runs out for the governor to sign it, or veto it, it then becomes law immediately. So that goes into effect. But most of the bills will go into effect on August 1st. Any questions about the timelines? Hearing none, we'll move on. So let's talk about our BESE legislative process timeline. So pre-April 5th, there was a date right above that, which actually talked about October when I start this process. But pre-April 5th, which is today, LDOE was analyzing the proposed bills ahead of the special called meeting. So on Friday, when all the rest of the bills dropped out, our staff, which I want to give my thanks to, they have worked so hard on this to get this turned around in time for this meeting. They all analyzed these bills, looked at the impact that would happen to it, and provided me with legislative briefs. That way I would be able to answer the questions that you asked me today and look somewhat intelligent on these bills as we're still trying to learn what they do. So that was the pre-April 5th. On April 5th, here we are, special call BESE meeting. So between April 10th and June 8th, that is the legislative session, and that's when all the fun happens, right? So you as BESE, when you approved the process last month, I will give BESE updates on Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays. Your Friday update, as most of you know, because you've been on the board now for a while, I give a full recap on Fridays, which includes clips of the videos from committee hearings, the movement of every bill that week, and the tracker updates of what made it in the chambers as well as in committee. Usually I'll also add, like, if there's any major amendments that have happened or substantive discussion that may have happened that I think it's important for y'all to know about. Monday and Wednesday, those updates primarily I will give to the officers, because that is when the officers will take positions. Usually our House Education Committees are on Tuesdays and Wednesdays, so that Monday is to prep for the Tuesday, Wednesday meeting and to go over those. And then on Senate Education, those are usually on Thursday, so that's what the Wednesday is for. A little bit of a caveat, as you see, is that those dates are subject to House and Senate approval. I talked with the House and the Senate yesterday actually, and they're still awaiting their tentative schedule for the beginning of session, so we're not sure if we're going to have a committee meeting on the first week, next week. But once that is known, we should know that by Thursday. That's what the rules have stated, that they have to know by that point. We'll know a tentative schedule, and then when the House fully comes in on Monday, they'll approve a committee schedule that'll allow it. But historically, these meetings have been on Tuesday, Wednesdays for the duration of session. Occasionally, if they need to add one, they will. They may take a day away that week because it's not as busy. But we do anticipate with a shorter session that we'll be filling up most of these days. Yes, ma'am?
Sorry, are you saying you will find out by tomorrow, Thursday?
Yes, by tomorrow, I'll know about next week if we'll be holding a committee hearing or not on education matters. So something that I want to share about the Monday, Wednesday updates to BESE, it has been requested in the past, that was usually an officer call, that we would go through the positions and talk through that and take positions for the next day. I will now be adding in that I will update everyone on Monday and Wednesday through an email of the positions that were taken for the week, for the day, the next day, or the Tuesday or Wednesday. That way you have enough time to fully think through if you want to show up at the Capitol to share testimony that is either in with the alignment of the position, or if you're not in alignment with the position. So to remind you of the BESE process that you approved last month, if you don't agree with the position of the officers, which is the position of the board, if you don't agree, you have the right to go to the table and state your thoughts as a member of BESE, but making sure that you mention that this is not the position of the board, this is my position as an individual BESE member. So you always will have that right to go to the table and share what you feel on a piece of legislation, either if the board has taken a position or has not taken a position. You're always welcome to go to the table, and I will usually be there and help you out to know the process and how to do it, but you are allowed to do that. So I'm going to try really hard this year to give you as much heads up as possible to give you more information, because that was feedback that we received over the last 2 sessions that I'm trying really hard to work through. You know, this is a very, it's a living process. It has twists and turns at every moment. And the House is really good about giving us agendas well ahead of time. The Senate will usually wait on that 24-hour rule to provide us with the agenda for the next day. So that usually becomes a little bit of a firestorm to try to get everything together in order for what we should expect the next day.
And I'll just reiterate that the purpose of this meeting is for us to have conversations about where we stand as individual BESE members to help determine where the board should be on different pieces of legislation. And so I think the point that Ethan's making relative to being able to come to the table and represent your own views as a BESE member, you represent a lot of constituents. But the opportunity for this meeting is to know what's being proposed in the legislature and then get a good sense of where the board falls. And so the department did start some principles, some BESE principles that will help guide us, because I know when you look at the list of bills, we're not here to debate people's bills, right? We're here to get an idea of what's being proposed and a sense of where the board will fall on those items. But there's always something that comes up. It's a very fluid process. And so today is our opportunity to talk about what we think is most important so that we can figure out as officers, when we're representing the entire board, we can do so in a way that's informed.
And I'll just say too that, it's really helpful to have Ethan's emails about when things are coming, because I think even sometimes the department gets a little bit of a heads up about the agendas before they're even coming. But there's also a tool that you can use on the legislative website called Tracker, that if there are certain pieces of legislation that you are really interested in, you can sign up through that to get email alerts when that bill is moving, if you want an additional way to keep track of what's going on.
I'm really glad you brought that up, Dr. Davis, because Shannon and I had talked about that. It is a very useful tool. And one of the reasons why we have to buy the software to track all the bills is because you're only allowed 50 bills on there. And so we're usually tracking, last year we tracked 280 bills alone in a legislative session. So imagine next year's legislative briefing on this, it'll be crazy. But looking at that, there are tools for you to be able to utilize, and I'll go over some of those tools when we move on to the tracker in the next agenda item, because in there, the links that I have provided is a treasure trove of information that, while I wish I could update each of you individually on every movement of a bill, during session, it kind of becomes almost impossible for me to continue that. So I am going to try at the best of my ability to keep every member updated. Usually I know your interested items ahead of time, so I know Dr. Davis, like I've given her heads up about this bill's coming up. I know you have feelings on this. If you'd like to come to the Capitol, here you are. I would do that for Mr. Castillo and everyone who's interested as well. So there are tools that we can utilize there.
And then Mr. Morris?
Ethan, so I appreciate the change in the process so that every member is advised and has the opportunity to engage. I'm just wondering, once the board has taken a position on something, if there is a member that is taking an opposing position, is there a way that officers can get that feedback so we can appreciate if there's something that we were missing in our initial assessment that officer has identified and we can take into consideration? Could we build that into the process some way?
Yes, so on the Friday, when I give you those weekly recaps, because we know the House meetings are going to be on Tuesday, Wednesdays, usually I have the House agenda already set. So that's going to be in the bottom of the email looking towards next week. So you're going to see the bills that are going to come up the next week. There may be some added, there may be some taken away, but primarily we're starting there. It's going to be up to the member who sees that it's an item that they don't agree with or have strong feelings on to relay that to the officers. And it's also in this meeting now that we're going to discuss some of those and those guiding principles that we have that we're going to take positions through, that it's important that you voice your concern to the officers. The officers are your representatives to this process. So those folks will go to you, Ms. Arani, to you, Holly, and to Mr. Castillo.
In the past, board members had reached out to Ethan and said, on the Friday, I disagree with this, and then on the Monday call, Ethan would say, I've heard from board member so-and-so, and they're opposed to this. So, you know, it's not just they have to contact the officers, they could let you know.
They could let me know.
And you could tell the
That's
officers.
correct. So usually they will let me know. I'm very close with each of you, so we can.
And since you're sending that email,
Yeah.
it's a reply to you.
Exactly.
There's a blind copy. So.
Exactly.
So I think it's important that yourself and the officers understand, their position, so we can take that into consideration if there's any potential changes to our position.
Yes, sir. And in the past, that's what we've done. So in the past, when there is a board member who doesn't agree with this position, usually we know it ahead of time, and I share that with the officers, and the officers take that information into consideration when they make their decisions. Any other questions before I move on? Okay, so looking at the last item on the legislative process timeline is July, which is the BESE plan of action completion. So by the BESE, by that date, I would have known what bills were signed and not signed or vetoed, those types of things. So I create what you see every year in the August meeting, which is the BESE plan of action, which shares with you when we're going to take policy revisions, exactly where those policy revisions will be affecting what bulletins, those type of things, so you can expect going forward. This was something that Shan had requested, I think it was 2 years ago, which has actually turned into a very helpful tool for both BESE and the department on the revisions, and it kind of gets us in the mindset of planning out the year for BESE of when we take policy revisions and statute requirements.
Most of them come in August.
Most of them come in August.
But you do also have a plan for when, if it doesn't come in August, when is it going to come and what has to happen before it comes?
And that, I want to also make note here that if a bill has the governor's, effective upon the governor's signature, there are times where BESE has policy already on the books. So if you remove a law, so this happened with the Praxis Core discussion 2 years ago, last year, I can't remember anymore. Last year. The problem was we had a BESE policy that was in there, so when the law was removed, BESE can put harder restrictions on top of the law. You just can't go in violation of the law. So when that law was removed, BESE still had a policy, so you still had to implement the rule that originally was there. So we had to do an emergency movement where Mr. Garvey had to basically waive that policy until BESE could come together to do away with that. So sometimes that will happen. So we may have to like work through the process of, all right, this is a hot button issue that needs to happen immediately. We don't like to do that, but sometimes it is required. All right, moving on. Let's talk about the LDOE 2023 legislative package. So this is when it's going to get fun, I know. So the first thing that we have on this list, of course, is SCR number 2, Senate Concurrent Resolution. The author is Chairman Cleo Fields, and this is the MFP resolution. You're very familiar with the MFP. We sent it across. I carried it and dropped it off, and they put it into a resolution. Here we are. So that's going to go through the process, and legislative leadership is going to weigh in on it. If they identify more money, they may send it back. So you know that the legislature can only give an up or down vote. They cannot alter the MFP across the street. The only thing they can do is approve it, or they can deny it and send it back across over here, and you have the opportunity to do as you please with it. So that is the MFP. Any questions about the MFP? Yes, sir.
So Ethan, you mentioned at some point they may recognize there's additional funding available. We all know there's a provision in the proposal on the table right now for that. What does that look like in the timeline, and what determines when that decision is made and would come into play or not?
Yeah, so that is really kind of soft territory there, because I don't even think REC has, the Revenue Estimating Committee has a date. I think it might be in May. And so when they identify the money, if they identify money, that's when the process would start. I've heard horror stories of the MFP being run through the process the final day of session, where it will start in its originating chamber and run through every single committee, which is, the education, the finance committee on both sides, and then the floors on both sides. So it's just going to depend on how leadership wants to move it through, so legislative leadership. Once we send it across the street, we have very little control over the MFP outside of talking with legislators and urging them the importance of it. So it's really going to be up to them of when they send it back to us. So there may be a situation where we have to have a special call meeting to discuss the MFP if it's sent back. But as of right now, there's no hard dates on that item of when that would be expected, because May, if we think June is when the session ends, and May is when REC meets, it then has to go through the process of being sent back, and then us taking it up, and then sending it back again, and restarting the process all over again.
Senate staff usually lets us know when the MFP is going to be up for
Yes,
consideration.
they usually let us,
Before
because they usually ask that the BESE president's there, as well as the superintendent, to answer questions. It's customary to have them there, maybe even the chair of administration and finance, usually there just in case.
we can reach out to them and see if they
Yes,
know anything.
yes. So the next item is Senate Bill 81 by Senator McMath. This will,
Ethan, before you
yes.
go on, I just want to acknowledge, there was a little bit of a difference in process this year because of when the new set of officers came in, and so on these particular bills, we worked and sought approval and got approval from the officers from last year, but then we'll do the same thing with the officers from this year. So we've actually already had 6 members of the board be engaged in this process. It was just a function of the timing. So in the previous years, that was not the timing issue, we were just taking the 3, but this year we actually worked with 2.
So this one is this one would impact educated workforce. So we know that we're staring down at a teacher shortage. And we're trying to do everything that we can to alleviate that shortage and get teachers into the classroom, into the pipeline. So this would be an associate teacher program. So if you have an associate's degree from an accredited university, you would be able to be in the classroom and be paid at 75% of the average teacher's salary for that district. You would have to be enrolled in a bachelor's program and go through the process of being certified through one of the all-cert programs to remain in the classroom after your 5 years, that this would give you that temporary authority to teach, basically. At that time, after the 5 years, of course, you wouldn't be able to get it again unless if you were working through the process of our traditional teacher certification routes. You would also have a mentor teacher with you, that way you can assist if one is available. And then on top of that, this would be done by the local education agency this permit would be given. That way we don't add additional red tape into the already bogged down certification process that we're working on. We wanted to make sure that the locals are allowed to make this decision.
So digging into these bills, does the legislative package, does that need to come on the next agenda item, like asking specific questions about the bill? So are you just giving us the overview now and then we dig into it on the next?
We can dig in on the next one if we want to dig in. I wanted to just go over each one and give you top line things while I had the chance to pull it out into this one. But they are denoted on your packet of topic bills there, the lavender color, are department bills. So we can dig into it on that side if y'all want. I just want to give you top line information on what we're bringing as a package from the LDOE this year. So moving on to the next one, oh yes ma'am.
Since we're talking about the associate teacher program, as a member of the Teacher Retention Commission, there's been some concerns about this particular bill in regards to the age of the individual who's going through this, like a
Yes, ma'am.
17-year-old, 18-year-old,
having
having an associate.
I didn't specify that. That is actually in the bill that you have to be 21 years of age. It puts a minimum age.
So evidently something was worked out.
Yes, because of the feedback we received from the Teacher Recruitment and Retention Task Force, we did add in that because we were thinking through, because associate's degree, you can essentially get those now in high school, because we're doing such a great job with our career and tech and dual enrollment things. But we did put in that minimum age of 21.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, moving on to the next one is House Bill 191 by Representative Jefferson, another educator workforce certification evaluation bill. This one allows for third-party teacher evaluations. So currently, school systems will contract with a vendor for special education services or things like Teen Challenge, who employ educators. The issue is, with our certification laws and rules on the books, that you have to have a positive or an effective evaluation for 3 years of the 5 for you to be able to maintain your certification. When you are leaving to work for a third party, you're not being evaluated, because the only people who can evaluate you are a school system, and you're not an employee of the school system. So this would allow and carve out an opportunity for BESE to create rules and an evaluation process, if they're an approved vendor by BESE, that they would allow to be evaluated so teachers can maintain their certification throughout that time. The other thing that this bill does is it allows for the non-publics and for the public system to be able to switch back and forth between that. So if it recognize your evaluations from the non-publics as well. And then there is the state reciprocity, that's a little bit in this as well, so it takes into 3 accounts, and that is if you're out at 3 of the 5 years, you have to have an effective evaluation and work a year in the state. Maybe that other one's for a different bill, but definitely 3 out of the 5. Moving on. Is the House Bill 326 by Representative Nelson. So this is the foundations of math, the first part. So similar to what we did with literacy, which is the science of reading, this is those foundational math. So this is going to be for teacher prep programs, that this would be included in their curriculum to be taught, which are the evidence-based foundations of math. This is the first part. There's a second part, which is Senate Bill 163 by Senator Hewitt, and it does it the same thing. However, it's a professional development, which is going to be paid for by the department, the program, for active service teachers. So that's the ones that are currently in the classroom. So if you're in grades 4 through 8, you would be required to do this professional development training on the foundations of math. We will pay for the program with some of our stimulus funding, and then there's probably going to be some additional conversation around going forward after this, so those teacher prep parts.
So just for clarity on that last part, is this a one-time requirement? Is it using ESSER money for this time, so is this a one-time requirement?
For the current teacher workforce, it's gonna be a one-time requirement. So the current ones, they're gonna have, is there gonna be a time frame on this, Jenna? On when they have to have it done by?
Yes, they would have to have it done by, they would have like over an entire school year.
They would have over an entire school year to complete the professional development for it. But we would be paying for it for the active service teachers now, and then the prep providers will handle the ones that are currently going through the system.
Okay, with the science of reading on the literacy side, the whole intent was we would put all of our teachers through this, you know, the free and such, to put them all through with the intent that all the college, university, and alternate teacher prep programs would then incorporate that into the program so that the need to do it once their practitioners would be on.
Same thing with this.
Okay, this is the same intent. Where, do we know where are we with the science? In other words, is the science of reading for literacy currently then incorporated into every college and university curriculum so that when they're currently graduating, they already have it, as well as the mandate for the teacher prep program?
I'm gonna ask Dr. Chesson to come up to answer that question for you, because I don't know the details of where we are right now on the science of reading, so she might be able to answer that for you.
While she comes up, I would mention too that really there's two processes there outside of the active teachers. One is the work with the university providers, but also the separate work where we're developing that science of reading training that we would own. So that's what we use some of our SEA set-aside dollars from ESSER, so that we're developing our own science of reading training that will be open source to all systems moving forward, in addition to the actual colleges of education having that embedded into their program. And so this does essentially the same thing for math.
Superintendent Voce, I believe your question was, are the teacher prep programs, have they all incorporated the science of reading into their, so they have until next year. So beginning the 24-25 school years, completers would need that science of reading. So they are in the process of incorporating. Some of our teacher prep programs are a little further ahead than others, but it is required by that 24-25 year that they would all have that embedded. To Dr. Brumley's point, we are working with Louisiana Tech. You all had approved that interagency agreement quite a few months ago. And so they are developing that science of reading training that we will then own in perpetuity. And our school systems will be able to use that ongoing, and our prep providers will be able to use those modules that'll be available online and embed that into their coursework. We also have nearly 70 professors from our teacher prep programs across our state who have undergone their science of reading training this school year. So that was really exciting because that was optional for them. And to have nearly 70 professors throughout our state willingly undergo that science of reading training was really exciting.
So just to try to simplify, are you saying that the graduates of 2025, May of 2025, anyone who comes out of a college, university, or approved alternate teacher prep program will have this?
Yes, they will have had the science of reading coursework embedded.
Okay, May of 2025. So the next 2 years we have to make sure that we do that catch-up. This numeracy piece that we're talking about, this legislation goes through, do we have any timelines looking at that for incorporation? And this is 4th through 8th grade, so maybe, because we've done some science of reading with our 4th and 5th grade teachers as well, and opening up to middle school as well. Is this the same length of time we're talking about? Are we talking about something like 56 modules and hours of PD that they would have to now go through with the math until it's incorporated into these programs?
So we are looking at something similar, about 50 or so hours of modules, 4th through 8th grade teachers. Our plan is to develop a K-3 counterpart to be optional for those teachers, knowing that those are our teachers who are undergoing our science of reading training.
But knowing that many of those teachers teach mathematics as well, so we'd have an optional K through 3 that we plan on developing and building as well. The timeline is a little different. The timeline in the bill that Representative Nelson is carrying to change the teacher prep program components, that one is open in the bill, meaning that we'll develop policy as we work with our teacher preparation providers to begin making those shifts, and you all will approve that in BESE policy through bulletin. It's open in the bill because we need to work through that with our teacher prep providers for how quickly they can make those changes. What's different between Senator Hewitt's bill here, the required training for 4th through 8th grade, and the Act 108 training in the science of reading, is that we were able to identify for Act 108 science of reading trainings, really, I would call it an off-the-shelf product. We were able to identify several. We have 4 approved providers. We ran a request for applications process through that bill and through the work on that bill and the implementation, and we were able to identify 4 really strong providers already off the shelf, ready to do that PD with our teachers across the state. The difference here is there is no math professional development off the shelf that does exactly what we feel our teachers need. And so we'll have to develop it. And so in the absence of that existing program, we are developing an RFP where we would identify one vendor or a set of vendors to help create that professional development program that aligns with our Louisiana standards for mathematics and aligns to really the vision of what our students and our educators need for mathematics. And so the timeline looks a little differently because our teachers wouldn't be able to start this training right away next year, which is a good thing, I think, for our schools and school systems. It would give them a runway to prepare on how they can think about making that time as job embedded as possible. They can prepare for if they want to incorporate it into their summer PD, into their school year PD, into their job embedded PLCs, for instance. Our school systems and schools would have an entire year to prepare for that because the training would then be available the following year. Because this next year, we would release the RFP, identify those vendors, and develop the actual program for teachers.
Okay, and this will be funded through some of the ESSER money that we're talking about?
Our ESSER state set aside.
What about either stipends or something for teachers to go through this program? Because I'm presuming if we're talking those numbers of hours, it's going to be outside of school hours because there's not that many inside of school hours to be able to do.
There are not that many in. The plan is that it would be similar to Act 108, up to the local LEA to decide how much, if a stipend, to arrange how much this could be job embedded. We do plan on releasing some sample schedules, both calendars for how this could fit within a PD schedule, as well as how it could be embedded within the school weeks.
And just to draw everybody back to what we're trying to solve for here, is just looking at math proficiency and math outcomes. We know that our 4th grade math mastery rates are in the 40s, but we also know that once those students are tested in 8th grade, those numbers are in the upper 20s. And this is across the state, so this is a systemic issue of outcomes in terms of mastery rates in math going down from 4th to 8th grade. And so that's why we're trying to really zero in on this particular grade.
And I think you're right, something definitely needs to be done. We are not finding middle school teachers with math certifications, and people that we're hiring have difficulty passing the praxis content area in middle school math, to be perfectly honest.
And I've
it's,
also,
you don't know.
I've also had conversations too, Superintendent Gaucher, and you probably have too, of teachers who are teaching 5th, 6th, 7th grade math content that never intended to teach that content. They were going to be a 1st grade teacher or a 2nd grade teacher, and so they were prepared for that content, and now they're teaching this content. And those are real conversations I've had with people.
I just want to point out, Shannon, we are missing House Bill 326 from our packet, so we might want to get copies of that.
It's on the watch list though?
It's on the package.
I don't want to get out of the weeds, but just a little bit more detail from where Superintendent Brumman was speaking to. At a high level, the focus for the literacy concern respondents. So What is the specific focus for the math initiative?
So we're calling this Foundations of Math. So that's, Foundations of Math varies. We're talking about basic computation. There's also an importance of children understanding place value at a young age in order to be able to understand a more conceptual level of mathematics. And so we're calling this foundational skills. It's also going to include a large emphasis on student practice for mathematics. I think this is something that teachers have maybe had the opportunity to do less of, but student practice in math is very important. Another thing is math dispositions that we plan on including. So quite often we hear people say, I'm not a math person. We don't hear people say I'm not a reading person, but it's really common to hear even adults say I'm not a math person, I don't get numbers. And so some of this is about math disposition. How do we build and utilize some of those foundational and what we would even call procedural skills, and for students to feel successful with those so that as they matriculate onwards to a deeper level of conceptual understanding, they have that confidence in math and feel like they are math people.
So this is required for all teachers or just math teachers?
Math, 4th through 8th grade math.
And one other point that Dr. Chasson and I talked about yesterday morning in our math team meeting here at the agency is just exploring those math standards too in 4th through 8th grade and making sure that we feel confident that teachers teaching those standards have the requisite skills in order to be able to do those things based on just looking directly at the standards.
And the vertical alignment, so often we see our high school math LEAP data. And we know that we have room to grow, and I think more often than not, teachers, to Superintendent Voce's point and Dr. Brumley's point, may or may not even feel like they're math people, and they end up teaching math in 6th, 7th, 8th grade. And so what is their understanding of Algebra 1 in geometry? And so it's super important for a 5th grade math teacher to understand that they are teaching the building blocks for students to be successful in Algebra 1 and what it's going to look like in Algebra 1 to know what kids need in that 5th grade math class. So vertical alignment will also be a huge emphasis for teachers to really understand the articulation of the standards as they build and grow from one grade level to the next.
Thank you.
Mr. Garvey?
If we're finished with this bill, I'd like to go back to one we had just talked about. Are we,
I have a
can
question
we do
about
that?
this one.
Well, why don't you go ahead and do this one?
I do have a question. As we're drafting and coming up with the foundations of math, we talk about the vertical alignment piece. One of the things I see from the junior high to high school transition, and this is in the weeds, I just want to put it out there, is that skipping 8th grade math has become a real challenge for high-level students as well as especially students who are struggling. But our high-level students tend to go right to Algebra 1 in 8th grade. I don't know what the process or why that started. I think it was part of LEAP to Praxis transition, and that certain exams were not quite transitioned and as challenging as others. But what we're seeing is our students' ACT scores struggle from this. So that junior high piece is really, really important with this foundations conversation. And I feel like anytime you're skipping a level of math, we need to have a conversation about like, why are we doing this and is this best for kids? So I'd like to just throw that out there.
And I think part of the reason they're incentivizing that in the accountability system, because we give middle schools points in the accountability system for kids that graduate with high school credit. And so like I've had my kids take 6 weeks of math during the summer, right, in order to be able to skip a math, and it's because they're high-performing math students, and so their school is trying to max out their points in the accountability system. So we're incentivizing something that is later causing a problem for some of our high schools.
Yeah.
Mr. Garvey?
Yeah, going back to the associate teacher program, and some other bills that have come up recently and maybe come up later today, that seem to be partly designed to address a teacher shortage issue that we're experiencing, which I think the whole working world seems to be experiencing, non-teachers as well as teachers. There's just a shortage of workers, it seems like. With this bill and bills like it, it seems like we're reducing some of the requirements that it takes to become a teacher and get into the classroom. And as I said, as this is tied in to the teacher shortage, is there any thought about what these bills will do once the teacher shortage is over? The reducing of these requirements. And I guess I'm also asking, are legislators, are you hearing concerns from legislators that we are reducing the requirements for a temporary issue, and yet there's no sunset on these bills for maybe changing things when the current crisis is over? And would those concerns may be relieved if we put a sunset into these bills? Maybe these bills will not cause any kind of problems later on, but maybe we ought to plan now to relook at them to see if they did cause any problems when we reduce the requirements.
Yeah, this is modeled in many ways after nursing. So you have 2-year RNs, you have 4-year RNs, and if I'm in the doctor's office, I don't typically ask the nurse if they're a 2-year RN or a 4-year RN. I just hope that I get good care. We tend to believe that this is another opportunity to grow the workforce. There aren't expectations that are being lowered in any particular way. If they're still working towards certification, they still have to ultimately have passed the required assessments and all those different things to be a certified teacher. What this will allow, and it's only if a system wants to employ. So there's not a mandate that a system has to employ. But what this will allow is the opportunity for a system to employ someone and grow them. So they have a basic level of training to earn that 2-year degree. And over the next 2 years, essentially, or 2 to 3 or 4, they're working with a mentor teacher on their campus. They're in that job-embedded professional development. They're taking their college classes to finish out their 4-year degree. And then we feel like ultimately they're going to graduate with that 4-year degree and already be in a really good position because they'll have teaching experience under their belt. So we think that this is an opportunity, much like the nursing profession has done, to continue to grow our own profession. And we worked obviously with the community college system on this particular bill, and it would make sense that we would be working with them on this bill.
And I wasn't talking about just this bill. There are others, if I'm remembering right, where we have reduced the requirements for certification.
So,
have you been hearing any feedback of concerns about those?
So a lot of the bills that have passed last session when it came to addressing the teacher shortage have actually had a caveat that were for critical shortage areas only. So that is, and so I think it's the master's program was for emergency situations only, and some of the other things that we've done. In my opinion, I don't believe we're reducing the quality here or the requirements that we have, outside of also trying to find a way to reduce barriers to the profession. So we removed the praxis core because we saw that was a barrier. That was something that the teacher recruitment and retention task force saw as well. Everything we've done has been guided through that. There are legislators, there are some who want to maintain a very high standard of teacher quality, which of course we all want quality teachers in the classroom. So there are folks who do have a feeling that we are reducing those. But overall, we see a crisis in front of us that we need to address. So your point about a sunset or something like that, I mean, that is always something we can consider. Like I said, it's a living process as it goes through the process. If that is something that the legislature or we want to talk about, that is something that can always be added in as an amendment later on. But there are some legislators that feel that the requirements have been reduced.
But I think that those legislators are legislators that prefer that as an institution, we maintain teacher certification as something as an industry standard. There are also other legislators that believe that certification should not exist at all. So, you hear both sides of that particular debate.
Going back to the example of nursing, in nursing, there's a gradual increase of responsibility. So a CNA is not able to act and have all the responsibilities that an RN has. Does the bill create a parallel ability to increase the responsibilities for the individuals. And I say that because I think the comparison is a good one. I also think, when I think about the nursing profession, we have a CNA program at my school. I had a student I was talking to yesterday that wants to be an RN in labor and delivery, and was able to talk through. She didn't quite understand the value of becoming a CNA first. I was able to talk that through with her. And so I think part of the struggle for us is that our profession's not built like nursing, right? And so have you all looked at a way to get creative in the way that responsibilities are assigned, and does the bill do that? Because I think there's opportunities, right? And I think there's models in different parts of the country. I know there is an organization called Opportunity Culture, and Opportunity Culture works to where they extend the reach of the most effective teachers, and they have paraprofessionals who spend time doing more of the day-to-day operations for students, right? Like, they're gonna be the ones checking roll, they're gonna make sure that the excuses get to the front office and that kind of thing. But the responsibilities for the instruction and the student learning fall on another teacher who is responsible for more students, because they have such an incredible impact on the students, and their time is spent on the instruction piece. And so, unfortunately, our profession we haven't shifted in those places. Is there anything in the bill that's gonna help us make those shifts to make sure that at the end of the day, we have someone who's gonna be responsible for the student learning, who has reached the standard that we've talked about?
Yeah, I think you see some professional shifts, like for instance with the operator agreement that we just made here in Baton Rouge. That's actually their model. That's what they do. They assign more students here, they wait for mastery of the concept, then they discharge those students to another area, while students who need more support get a lower teacher-to-student ratio. So I think you're going to see more of that as the profession evolves. Here, what we were looking at more than anything else is the opportunity to grow the profession. We were looking at the fact that even with some important policy shifts last year, we know that we still are about 1,200 teachers short across the state. And so what happens in those classrooms? Either best case scenario is you have a long-term sub. Then after that, it's a day-to-day sub. Or the worst situation that too often happens is the principal has to step into the classroom and say, okay, 25 students, you're going over to this class. And then you have a teacher watching 2 classes and really can instruct the class that he or she has. And so we're just looking at this as another tool in the toolbox. Again, it's capped at 10%. No more than 10% of the workforce can be this. And then we built in an incentive from a salary standpoint that they're only able to earn 75% of average teacher pay within the system. And then I think the other important part that you mentioned in terms of like paraprofessionals don't have to have any degree. So we see this as a position above in terms of ranking that paraprofessional, because the paraprofessional doesn't have to have any degree.
So I would suggest, and I know we're gonna talk more about it, but I would suggest that this is looked at as a first step, but that in order to make the shifts that are necessary to truly serve students, that it's not just this piece, right? Like, our problems are not gonna get solved with this piece of legislation. And that while the models exist, and even the operator that has been recruited to come to the capital city might be able to demonstrate that and be held up as an exemplar, that there's likely more policy work that's going to have to happen to make sure that our students get what they need. Also, just who is leading math in the department? And it falls under you, Dr. Chasson, and then who's your point person? Because I was actually trained to be a math teacher, and I had a flashback to my first year of teaching as you guys were talking, and the disposition piece. And a student who, on the first day, I said, I want you to draw your math experience. Illustrate for me what your math experiences are. And I can clearly see that child's illustration still today, and we're 20 plus years later, of a kid with a completely black background and him furiously trying to figure things out. He was a very talented artist, but did not see himself as a mathematician. And so I'm interested in long talks with that person, but I'm not gonna bore everybody else here about those things.
Sharon Nikes leads our academic content department,
Okay,
and Jamie Abair, who's been with us for a few years, is our director of math, and Jamie hails actually from Lafayette Parish, where she led math there.
oh, yeah, remember you stealing some talent, okay. Yes.
Okay, you know, I have some of the same concerns that Jim seems to have with this as well. I'm looking at this, that, to me, if this is a short-term measure, I mean, Superintendent Brumley, you're talking about it as another tool in the box, even long-term, which I guess I do have more concerns about.
Dr. Loche, which one are you referring to, which bill?
The
That's
associate
associate teacher.
Okay,
Yeah,
so-
it's the same.
because I had some, yeah.
And, you know, as I'm looking at it, it looks like a 5-year thing. I want to make sure there are safeguards that these people are progressing at least toward that degree in a timely manner. I'm also looking at, one of my major concerns when I would hire a teacher, to be perfectly honest, is that they know the content area that they're teaching. You know, not that we can work with them on instructional strategies, how to get across to children, how to do classroom management, those kinds of things. We work every day with the teachers, but if they do not know the content area, that's like a non-starter for me, especially when you get to the middle and high, say for example, math or whatever. Because then you've got to go from square one, providing a background of the content area, as well as how to teach it. So it's a very difficult thing. When I'm looking at this particular piece of legislation, it has no safeguards in it to say, okay, an associate degree with maybe a passage of the practice content area that they're going to teach or something. Something to signify that they know content, and then we work with them more in the area of instructional delivery. I'm also looking where it says DVR participants shall be employed to teach only in the content area related to his associate degree. Now, I'm no expert on every title of every associate degree that comes out of every community or a college or so, but most of them, I think, are just general associate degrees in, I don't know, maybe education, or associate degrees in, I've never seen any that says an associate degree in mathematics, or an associate degree in middle or secondary math, or English, or whatever. It's more of a generalized. So I'm not even sure what that particular bullet means. Is that going to reserve it only for elementary teachers, maybe, that need a more generalized one? And you're not looking at, unless I'm way behind the times, I don't know too many of the associate degrees given in specific content areas where I would need someone at the middle and the high school level. And it specifically excludes them from working with, special education, students with exceptionalities. So then my mind goes to, okay, we're talking, is this really only going to be like looking at elementary teachers? Because I don't know too many content area associate degree people. That's just a question. when we would look at
Actually,
this.
we have someone on the board that can speak more to associate degrees in our community college system, but they do vary. And the other point I would make there, Superintendent Boucher, is like, the law doesn't mandate hiring. And so you, as the local superintendent, I know you will, you're going to look at the best candidate and who is that best candidate. And I can't see you employing someone that you don't think has that level of
In
ability.
today's world, I could not make that statement definitively, but in prior life, yes, I would. I understand. And I know there's no easy thing, and I realize this is just one more option to look for, but if we're writing this with these bullets this specific, and if we're really trying to make that one of the tools in the toolbox, I'm not even sure I could employ someone other than an elementary teacher with it, unless we had many of these different associate degree people coming out with actual content area associate degrees. So if you want to make this work, I'm not sure how to get around that, to be honest.
I mean, yes, there are people receiving specific associate's degrees. And then also, we have an associate of science and teaching degree, which we didn't have a large number of students receiving because of the praxis core being such a barrier for our students. And so I think there were like 1,000 students who could have potentially gotten an associate of science and teaching degree, but didn't receive it because of praxis core. So those are 1,000 potential teachers.
But that's associate of science and teaching.
I know.
That's not in the content.
That's not what it
math
says. That
or
says all
English or
associates.
science.
And I think that that's the challenge in the conversation here is that, you know, there are associate's degrees out there in all kinds of different majors. At the end of the day, you know, a tool in a toolbox is helpful. I think of rural districts, I don't necessarily think that this is, I think we've got some more work and some more conversations with this, but I do think having an associate's degree for a principal in a district that is really struggling to find teachers is way better than having, you know, a long-term sub or a day-by-day sub in a classroom for the rest of the year. I experienced that, and I wasn't even in a rural school district. And so I think there are definitely challenges and conversations we need to have, and there's some things that maybe we need to talk about, like Jim and I were just talking about like when do we revisit this? We know we're in a crisis now, but what's next? You know, my vision was that Associate of Science and Teaching would become an associate's opportunity for our teachers to like earn while they learn, which is a great opportunity to grow our own programs. But there's definitely some really talented associate degree students out there who would do an excellent job in a classroom. I think the challenges are, you know, how do we make this work within our parameters, and how do we make sure that we're serving students well? I think your elementary education conversation is important too, because there's a generalization there. As they get into junior high and high school, it gets much more complicated. So we have a lot to talk about, but I definitely think having this conversation is the right next step.
But I do think if we are looking at this to actually use, that the language needs some cleanup to be, the districts to be able to use it, for those districts who wish to do so.
Yeah,
I think it's somewhat restrictive right now.
Maybe Ethan, you can work with Superintendent Bochet on that language to what would be more helpful for the system.
I was gonna share that. That's the beauty of having this meeting right now, thanks Dr. Davis, because we're able, it's a living process, right? So we're able to make changes as the process goes forward and incorporate some of the feedback. Because you brought up good points. Is this maybe too restrictive to some extent, or can districts actually use that? So thank you for sharing those inputs on that.
I want to go back to Superintendent Brumley's comment. I appreciate the different approaches that are on the table right now to address the teacher shortage, both on the supply side and the demand side. But going back to Superintendent Brumley's comments and my personal experience, I'm concerned about the load on teachers. You know, when I go in and I sub and I get my list, you know, that planning period that the teachers used to have, right? Now I'm going to another class to teach that class or babysit in that class because I'm really thinking about the material in that class because you don't have enough subs, right? And then you don't have enough subs, and then you put all the kids in the cafeteria with adult babysitters in there, and we're calling that classroom instruction now. So I would say that's not really the exception. That's the norm in every school I've been in the last year. So I'm just wondering, given all the work that we're doing to address this issue, are we looking at the load that we have on the teachers? And, you know, particularly given, you know, the additional PD that we're talking about adding. Is anybody looking at how we can potentially unload the teachers a little bit so that it's more instructional time and not, you know, just this extra that we're asking them to do? Is anybody looking at that?
And I think we all look at that every day. I mean, that more than anything I find is not just a state level issue. That's a local system issue. That's a principal issue and how they work with their staff. But you're right. If we can't fill the void in the workforce, then someone has to supervise children at school. And so you're going to continue to have, situations, as you said, are the norm, where you're doubling up classrooms, just for supervision point, not for academic point.
Right.
And, this for us is just another opportunity to provide an additional opportunity to bring people into the workforce. One of the questions I always ask to teachers on our Superintendent Teacher Advisory Council that we started this year is like, tell me what's bureaucracy to you. Tell me what's paperwork to you. Tell me the things that create this atmosphere that you're talking about where you have this level of overburden. They've shared some of those things with me. I think another piece is just they want environments that aren't disruptive. They want to be able to teach without issues that are maybe behavior issues or external forces. They want to be able to teach free of distraction. So we have to continue to look at those things.
So I just want to make the point, I think it's worth considering a focused effort to look at it and help people to really appreciate what that situation is today. And is there anything that we can do to identify any areas specifically that we can focus on and address?
And I believe that's also something that's being tasked with the Teacher Retention Recruitment Task Force, the great work that Dan Cooper is doing with that group and Board of Regents to look into not just the retention, the recruitment part, but also the retention part. And so they have discussed some of those things. And I know that Representative Mincy is going to be updating that task force again to go for another extended amount of time. And we've gotten feedback from that group, and we've worked with some bills working through that as well in the previous session and also in this one with them. So I imagine that they're working on this as well. So the department definitely is looking at that.
To Ronnie's point, and I realize it's a little bit off of the bill, this particular bill, loosely tied maybe off of the PD bill. The amount of PD that we are requiring and the legislature is requiring of teachers is huge. We have gone, as many other school systems, to a system where it's given online, because there's no way you're going to gather every teacher together to make sure they have this many hours of suicide prevention, this many hours of this many hours of that. I do all of the same ones that the teachers do, okay? I spend maybe 3 full days and nights just doing the requirements. And look, in and of itself, everything that's in any one of those pieces of legislation is a good thing. You know, suicide prevention training, this kind of training, that kind of training, bullying, this, whatever. But there comes a point where, as Ronnie's saying, the teachers are just like had it. You know, they've got to do it annually, they're going to do the same thing over and over again. And the number of hours is astronomical. When I'm looking at the numeracy PD, you know, part of me is saying, we really need this. You know, this is something that our teachers need, and there is no doubt that they need it. And then I'm going through, I had to sell this to my people too, what a wonderful thing this is. And then when you're trying to provide time, as Ronnie's saying, well, do it during your planning period. Well, that either wipes out your planning period, or during your planning period, you're taking an additional class because you don't have subs, you don't have this, you don't have that. This holistically has to be looked at, and even with some of the legislators, there has to be a more centralized approach to teacher training and what they are required to do. And should this be every year? Should this be once every 3 years? Should this be whatever? But there has to be some work group here at the department that's going to take a look at all of these required trainings and work with our legislature to see how we can effectively do what we need to do and still reduce that load.
So it's very interesting you mentioned that, because last year Representative Mincy passed a bill, so
Yes,
it
I
became
know
law,
about that.
which requires the Department of Education every 5 years to review all trainings for educators from the state level. We don't know really a lot about the local level requirements. It but from a state level, and recommend changes both to BESE and also to the legislature every 5 years. We took an initial look at that after the bill was passed, because we had to do an initial report of all those things, and we sent it over. And a lot of them are kind of like safety things. So it's hard to be able to determine how often are those types of things, because we're not complete experts on that. But that at least is the beginning and the start of reviewing these. Also, the conversations that have started across the street have focused on the amount of trainings that are required of our teachers. And it makes it hard for us as a department as well when we see things like the science of reading and the foundations of math training that we want to do, because we're going up against all these other trainings. And so they're starting to get wary of more requirements on top of teachers. So I completely understand your point, and that is a conversation that has started across the street.
So that 5-year review, it comes to the department, or it comes to BESE, or both, and we should...
The department does the 5-year review, and then we report it to BESE, and we also report it across the street.
When should we see that?
You already received that, the first initial report of that. I don't remember exactly what month it was brought to y'all. I think it was in January. You received that report. I can always forward it over to y'all again.
Yeah, I'd like to look at it again.
I don't know if it's
Legislative
totally
reports.
complete either. There are some
That's where it
federal
would be.
regs on homelessness and all of these things that we have to put our teachers and administrators through, or nurses or whatever, that wasn't necessarily on there.
Okay.
We've got to really look at this and then add up the number of hours yearly and
Yes, sir.
see, and then add these to it.
I had a legislator last session indicate interest in a particular bill that would have required additional training on a subject. If I mentioned, we would all say, yeah, every kid needs to know that. But just shared with this particular legislator that there's no way that I can support it, because it would be an additional training on teachers. I think one of the things I think that we're getting right about this approach to science of reading and foundations of math is that we're taking care of the immediate, but then we're building it into the university preparation. And so I think it's a short-term pain for a long-term gain by building it into the university preparation. So that's that's kind of our approach on that. I do know that there's another bill that actually allows the local superintendent to waive, if it were to pass, it allows the local superintendent to waive some of these trainings if the local superintendent believes that it is impacting the teacher's ability to teach reading, math, science, and social studies.
We'll see that lawsuit when.
Ms. Bocce, I do want to point out, if you go to the principal's document and count down 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 bullets, there is one recognizing the critical role of teachers as the #1 in-school factor influencing outcomes for students, and supporting educators by promoting a safe teaching environment, free from disruption, unnecessary bureaucracy, and external distraction. And so I think the points that you and Mr. Morris made are putting an emphasis on this notion of protecting the classroom and the classroom time and the time of the teacher. So I appreciate hearing the comments, because it's helping me think about, as we look at bills, that filter around something may be good in and of itself, but when it's added to all of the other things that teachers do, it might actually take us off the focus of the role of our school and the purpose of our school. So I appreciate the comments. I do think Ms. Holloway's been waiting to speak.
Thank you. I just want to add in regards to the Teacher Retention Commission, the conversations that we've had in here, Ronnie, Ms. Bocce, Holly, was basically the same sentiment of what you're feeling, and we need to look at it holistically of what is out there, and to keep our profession at a high bar with teacher certification. And there were several concerns about the associate, and that there needs to be more conversation about the requirements, the safeguards, and how to manage through this. Yes, we need additional tools, but what is the right way? What does that bill look like, and where did it come from, and why? So those were the type of questions that we had during our conversation at this Teacher Retention Commission. So I just want you to be aware of that, because here we are having bills that are adding additional things for teachers. And now they cannot have additional things added to them if we expect great outcomes and results in our students.
Thank you. So, Mr. Melanson, can you get us back to the slides?
Yes, happy to, yes. Hey, it's me again. So, moving on to the second page of the department package, the first one on this slide that we have is Senate Bill 59 by Senator Bernard. This topic is BESE. So just to give you a little bit of a background, in 1955, you bought some property in Natchitoches Parish.
1955.
In 1955. Joan and I have had some fun doing some historical research on this topic. But you bought some property in 1955. In 2011, there was an act passed that would allow BESE to sell, transfer, or lease the land to the police jury of Natchitoches Parish. The police jury did not want it, so you still own this land. We were contacted about the city of Natchitoches is interested in the property. So unfortunately, because of the 2011 law, we could only transfer, lease, or sell the property to the police jury other than a normal state auction that would happen. So this bill is allowing BESE to enter into a lease, to sell the property, or to gift the property to the city of Natchitoches. It does not automatically do it. You still have the power to do it if you want to do it. But that's what this bill is doing. It's just allowing that transfer of land.
Just to clarify, right now, my understanding is it's just a vacant, empty piece of land. correct?
There is a building on it. That was an old Head Start program that's very kind of dilapidated right now, if I do say so myself. So there is a piece of, or there's a building structure on it, if we can call it that. But it has not been used in many years, I'm told.
Exactly. All right,
Have we had it appraised?
That would be the process of state lands, and I believe with y'all and state lands. So that I don't have the expertise on this, so Joan can always come up and talk about it if necessary, if you have detailed questions about land swaps in the state.
Who's gonna determine and who's gonna negotiate whether or not it is a sale?
The Office of State Lands is definitely involved in that. So that we have a whole division of state lands that will deal with that.
So this board would be approving for them to negotiate on our behalf since we're the owner? Is that the right interpretation?
Joan, would you mind coming up and
You know,
answering some more of this question?
If they are mandated like
They're the
this,
ones who do.
They do it. We don't have a choice.
The only thing you are doing is allowing to
We
lease,
cannot
sell, or
make money, make profit. I'm just kind of confused though, because we have donated, like we donated land to Jefferson Parish not too long ago, school board. I don't know, what's the difference, like, how can we have donated it before and handled it that way, and this we have to have a statute for it?
because in 2011 is my understanding.
Right. Well, there doesn't have to be a statute. It could be through auction, but Natchitoches didn't want to do the auction route because then they might not be the lowest bidder and they might not get the land. You can also do it through lease for up to 99 years. But that didn't seem like the best solution for anyone either. And it would have to be for a public purpose, and they'd have to state what the purpose was, and then it would tie them into just using the land for that reason. So this seemed like the easiest way to transfer the land to Natchitoches without any of those other complications.
Maybe it wouldn't be for public. Maybe that's why.
You'd have to be-
Donated it before.
Yeah, but it has to
Transferred
be.
to LCTCS properties, you know.
We did, and we did a Bunkie also, you may remember that.
Yes.
Over to GOSAP and the Special Ed Center to the Department of Health. But those were cooperative endeavor agreements, and it has to be for a public purpose, and you have to state what the public purpose is, and they can only be used, then the property can only be used for that purpose afterwards.
Is this it on the land? Do we have any other pieces of land anywhere in the state?
Yes.
We have so much.
Yes, you do.
More land, okay, it's not it. Mr. Rock, you had something to say, and I think you might know about it.
Yeah, lots of.
That's the old trade school in that key.
Yes, exactly.
So what, if any, level of engagement does this board actually have in this transfer process?
Just choosing what to do with it, right?
Yeah. Once, if Natchitoches actually does want it, then, but we would work, and Alex knows about it as well, so we would work with the state land office to to transfer the land between y'all and that petition.
So whatever the state land office recommends or decides to do, this board would approve that action?
Yes, you'd have to agree to it.
And
So I
any
think-
transfer would require the board endorsing that move?
Yes.
Okay, thank
It
you.
would be the board making the decision if you wanted to do that. State lands, my understanding, would take care of everything else, the appraisal, all that stuff. The board would have to decide what it wanted to do, and then the Office of State Land would take it from there.
And just to be clear,
That would pay for the transfer fees, because I don't want us to have to pay for.
We
There's
can
like a
cover,
fee.
they have to pay for it.
Okay, because there's a fee for handling, it's not.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
true.
just to be clear, we didn't sit around in a room and think about this piece of land in Acrovich that we wanted this board to take
Well, let's
action.
about the overall process.
The senator from that particular area, working with his local community, brought this to us.
And so just to say, you become experts in random areas, about this deep of an expert. I never thought I'd have to deal with the land transfers, but here we are.
How about drilling?
Whoa, I think y'all should say.
Okay, let's stay on topic.
Okay, moving on to the next item. Senate Bill 197 by Senator Peacock. This is the teacher workforce. So this is a massive teacher certification cleanup bill. So the first thing that this bill does, actually let me give you a little background first. So we approached Senate, if you remember, during all this certification backlog, we were called before the Senate. A lot of the senators offered help to try to clarify the process, clean some things up, and streamline the process. We approached Senator Fields about this because of the 5 limit general bills. This is a general bill. They have decided to do one big certification bill on the Senate side, essentially. So Senator Peacock is the person who's carrying that bill. He was already carrying it because of the GPA flexibility that needed to be put back in for BESE and teacher prep programs. So this bill does a lot of things. The first thing it does is, I'm gonna pull up my little sheet just to make sure I'm doing this properly. The first thing that it does is restore the GPA flexibility for teacher prep programs. So Ms. Voce remembers this. We had a lengthy discussion about the GPA flexibility for our Grow On programs and also for teacher prep programs. The second thing that it does is teacher certified in other states. So it's a portion of teacher reciprocity that is included in here. It removes requirements for teaching authorizations and certifications. So the TAs, that is when a local district as a state, about a decade ago, we put in a law that subs, all these folks, we had to check to make sure the local districts were doing their background checks. It's added to the backlog that we have. It's a bureaucratic extra step that's in there. So we are recommending that would come out. Also qualifications and certifications of principals, superintendents, and school psychologists. And then there's discussion around the criminal background checks for certification and authorizations to teach. So this bill does a lot. With this bill, obviously there's a lot of our inputs in here, and the senator also had some things that he wanted to do in the bill as well. So this is a very large certification cleanup bill, which would take some time to dig into, and I'm happy to do that. We also have staff here who can help us navigate through that. And everything in there is not ours. So there is one portion of that bill that this Senator Peacock wanted to put in that's around bachelor's degrees and emergency permits. So if you have a bachelor's degree, similar to what they did with the master's degree, you would be allowed to teach in a classroom. If you have 5 years of effective evaluations with a mentor teacher, you would be able to gain your certification through that way. We've talked to him about that, and that potentially it may be an issue going through the process, but he wanted to make sure that was in there because this is his bill. But he is amenable to talking to us and changing things in the bill to make sure that we get it across the finish line, because there are a lot of important things in this bill that help certification. It also streamlines where the certification laws are in law. Currently, they're kind of splattered everywhere. This puts it into its own section, so it cleans up the law to where it's an easier interpretation. I'm sure we have questions on this, do we?
What does this piece of legislation do anything about the issue that I've kind of brought up several times surrounding missing evaluations? And so teachers that are missing an evaluation, so they're not being declared ineffective. They might have 1 year of an effective evaluation, but then they went to a parochial school, they don't have that evaluation, and then we won't give them their certification.
So this bill does not address that. However, when it comes to the parochial, those things, that's in the bill we talked about earlier.
And that bill, does it take care of that problem when a traditional public school district or a charter school is not doing the evaluations?
So it does not take into consideration that. It just takes into the parochial to non-public transfer.
I wish Shane was here, because she knows that piece, and you're absolutely right. How are we gonna fix that?
Right. I mean, maybe when Shane comes back and we're digging in, I feel like we're kind of missing something.
What's that bill number, the other bill you're talking
The
about?
other bill, it was House Bill 191 by Representative Jefferson.
And this, I'm gonna have to like do a lot of thinking about this, because there's just a lot in here in this.
Yeah, no, definitely. I completely understand that. We worked with our certification team on this, and like I said, we can answer questions. We have staff here if you want to do it in the second part when we actually go through the bills. This is a lot to unpack in this one.
The other piece, members, that I just want to reiterate is this is an opportunity for us to start conversations, and this is a lot to consume for us, but hopefully by having the conversation and looking at the principles, it'll guide us. And so for those of us who want to go back and read more in-depth individual bills, we can have follow-up conversations about it. It's just, this gives us an opportunity to, as a board, flag certain things and talk about certain things. So, okay, so the other one relative to certification was House Bill 191.
191, yes.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Okay. So moving on to the next bill. It's
Wait,
House-
I have-
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, on this stuff about this criminal background check and certification, I guess I'm looking at page 14 and 15, all this stuff. Where it now says that anyone who has been convicted or pled no contender to a crime listed in 15587.1C can never get a records review or whatever. What specifically are we looking at here? Is it just, does this include possession of, say, a drug, or does it include just distribution of?
Yeah. I'm gonna pass the buck
Clarify a
over
little bit,
to
because
Joe.
this is a very, like.
Ms. Boucher, will you identify again where you're reading from?
Page 14.
The Senate Bill 197?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, this section is a problem. I was just looking at, for one thing, and we're going to have to do some cleanup on this, just like in the last bill, there sometimes say 15587.1 and sometimes say felony, and those are not the same thing.
Exactly. Right.
So that's one issue, but putting that aside, I was reading that this morning too. On the one hand, it says if you've been convicted of a 15587.1 crime or pled, that you don't even get an appeal, but in the very next paragraph, it says after a successful appeal, you can get your teaching certificate unless you were convicted of a felony. So that doesn't make sense. If you can't have the appeal in the first place, how could you have a successful appeal?
I was having a little difficulty following it, and I'm not even sure what they're referring to, because we've had many people that early on in their lives maybe made a mistake in some respect. I'm not talking about sexual or crimes against children, I'm not talking about any of that, but may have done something, 10, 15 years ago with that, and have been clean, whatever. But are we saying that person can never, ever, if this thing passes, be a certified?
Yes, that was one of my questions too, because not all of the crimes in 15587.1 are felonies. There's misdemeanors in there too, like contrib and that sort of thing, or, some of the contributing to the delinquency of a minor. Where we had one, she was 18 and bought beer for her 17-year-old brother.
Right, we've had those kinds of situations.
Yeah, which, bad decision early on, but should that preclude that person for the rest of their life from being able to teach. So, yeah, I think we need to work on cleaning up this
Yeah.
section.
And I think it's also important to understand, while this is a department bill that we're working with, it also has a lot of the actual senators' wants also in here. And so I know when we were working with Senate staff, the author had some pretty firm lines that he didn't want to cross either. I know one of them was specifically around drugs. Cheryl had shared that with me. So those things that we have to work on, just like any other legislative bill through the process, this one literally took right up to the end because it was so big and so many other people were putting in certification changes and things that now we have to go through and really work with staff and the author on cleaning up and clarifying some things, because this is a massive bill with a lot of changes inside of it that we want to make sure that we're relaying the best way to go forward. But ultimately, we are at the mercy of the author who is carrying this, because they are the only ones who can bring it.
Maybe we can work with, I mean, we've got to take,
Yes.
again, another holistic approach.
Yes.
I mean, if when you were 18 years old, when you were arrested for possession of marijuana or pills or whatever, and now it's 10, 15 years later, I don't see how you can never be or never get a certification.
Yeah. It's
Now, I'm not talking about distribution, manufacturing, and all that kind of stuff, but I'm talking about a personal. And then, I don't want to get into it right now, because I know we have a whole bunch of things to look at, but even all this pretrial conversion that we do some things with, that is so, people in their minds I still don't fully understand. And I had a lengthy discussion
Yes.
with Joan and one of your,
Yeah, try, yeah.
yeah, over that, and came away with a different understanding than what I did with some of our BESE staff on it. So I just want to make sure that in our zeal to protect children, I'm sure that's what this is, that it doesn't go so far. I'm not talking about people sitting in this room, but I'm sure we have people sitting in this room that might have,
Yes,
some
ma'am.
time in their early life that
And-
this happened.
And between legal staff and our certification staff, this is something we're going to continue working with the legislative staff on and the author on some of those points. So this is an opportunity, like I said, filed on Friday, did not get to see the final version until it really dropped. We got a heads up of some things, but it's something that we need to continue working in living process. So we're going to continue working through this as the session goes on.
Because every time we look at one of these in reviewing something, I have learned by sitting on this board, there are so many, life is tough in many ways, and there's so many variations of what has happened to people over the years. And I just want to make sure, unless it's something very egregious, that people have made good lives after doing something not so great when they're very young.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you for that. All right, so moving on to the next item, I want to make sure that we have a lengthy agenda, so I want to make sure that we're moving on quickly because we're still just in our package. Is House Bill 103 by Representative Mascarello. This deals with curricula, mainly requirements for graduation. So this would require for high school students a course in financial literacy. So currently in RS 17207, there's a list of things that need to be incorporated into curriculum dealing with financial literacy. This would actually mandate a class that is taken in high school. We did not add any credits to the graduation pathways. We actually utilized existing ones both in Jumpstart and in the TOPS diploma. The topics that it ranges to a very long list of topics to discuss. It's credit scores, it's how to request a loan, how do loans work, financial management, talking about all the different things that go into financial literacy. You've seen some of these bills or laws passed across the United States at this time. The representative came to us and said, I keep hearing that we have the worst credit scores in the state, but also the lowest financial literacy rates in the state, and gave us all the information from the different news outlets that identified that. So he wanted us to work on a bill with him on this, so we did. The one he gave us definitely needed some work, so we were able to put our thought process into this and really get it to a place where we're excited about this bill. We think that it's definitely needed as we're advancing through the education system. So.
Could you just briefly say in the TOPS pathway, where does it fit, and then the
Yes.
Jumpstart?
So in the
Just
Jumpstart,
real brief.
yeah, so in the Jumpstart pathway, because that is actually mandated in law, they have the pathway for that, this will be added as a third math. So currently in the pathway, we have Algebra 1, you have geometry or applied geometry, and then you pick 2. That's how it currently is. If this were to pass in the Jumpstart pathway, you would have Algebra 1, you would have geometry or applied geometry, and you would have financial literacy, and then you pick one from a list. On the top side of it, this will actually be added into one of the 4 electives that are not part of the TOPS requirement. This will end up being one of those electives will turn into financial literacy.
So we're reducing electives for our TOPS.
One of the electives, yes.
So, may I ask, according to information that we have in front of us, we have 2 different bills,
There are 2 different bills, that's correct.
103 and 118.
118 is Representative Ilg's bill, which we are in contact with him. Representative Ilg's bill is what was originally given to us in Muscarello's bill. So we helped Muscarello's bill, so it wasn't as much of a disruption. So Ilg's bill, there's a difference, where that is in the social studies pathway, it's a half of a credit, and it adds a credit to the diploma pathway. So
And
it
it's
doesn't
part of to
utilize.
manage, and for the districts to manage.
Yep.
Ms. Boche, you.
Oh, half credits are
They are
like
very,
this.
yes,
No.
half credit, that's why we made it a full credit hour, which means if you're on a block schedule, it's half of the year.
There's been quite a bit of chit chatter out there about the difficulty to manage this. And which bill is appropriate?
Ours is the one that is the year-long program, so it's a 1 full credit hour.
Can you clarify again if this is a TOPS requirement?
This will be a TOPS requirement.
So it will reduce, it is in their electives, and they'll have to choose it as one of their electives.
So the TOPS requirements do not take in consideration the 4 electives that are part of the diploma pathway. The diploma pathway excludes health and PE and the 4 electives. This will be adding one of the electives that are outside of the TOPS requirement into the TOPS requirement. So we're reducing from the diploma pathway one of the electives, and we are moving it into the TOPS required. So the reason we had to do this is because the TOPS University diploma is not in statute. The only thing in statute is the requirements for TOPS. So we control as BESE the TOPS diploma and Board of Regents. When it comes to the Jumpstart, that was put into law, I think during the previous administration. And so we actually have to change how we structure it there. We have a little more leeway on the TOPS University pathway with Board of Regents of how to do this, but it is going to be a required TOPS requirement. Yes, ma'am.
The only thing I'd ask to think about a little bit too is with the TOPS University pathway, you know, even in my school, we're trying to encourage the Grow Your Own program. We've got kids taking dual enrollment and teacher preparation programs, getting that, and they're using, and they're on a TOPS University pathway. They're not necessarily on a Jumpstart pathway. So the number of electives that they can take are getting less and less. And while, look, financial literacy, hey, it's another one of those things that's a really good thing, but now we're telling a kid that maybe they only are going to get 3 electives if they're going to college because they have to take this. We couldn't work it into the social, I mean, and I hate to even say this, the social studies teachers go crazy like Holly over here. You know, we need 4 units of social studies, which is going to be civics and U.S. history, and then you choose 2 others.
I'm not gonna go crazy, I promise. I'm gonna control
You
it.
promise? Okay. You know, so Representative Hill had wanted it as one of the, you know, courses, I know he had his half credit, within the social studies pathway. I just keep hating to reduce in the TOPS University pathway what kids can take. And we're selling our Grow Your Own Teacher Prep programs for them, we're getting them dual enrollment credit in this, and then we're gonna have to pull back and say, okay, one of these things, now you're gonna take the financial literacy, it doesn't count for anything, it's gonna knock out these other courses. So is there, I don't know if there's a way we can look at this a little bit more to see
Yeah,
how we can massage it a little,
Yeah, let me look at that.
would you?
Yeah, I'll go look at that. And just for some history here, this particular legislator came to us late in our process, really, and said, hey, I'm going to run this bill. And the initial draft looked a lot like Representative Ilg's bill. And so, you know, for me, whenever I'm traveling around the state, this is one of the most common things I hear in communities from parents and groups. Our kids are graduating high school. They're falling prey to predatory lenders. They don't know how to manage their savings, their checking. And it's like one of the top things I hear across the state. And so whenever you have a legislator telling me, hey, I'm running this bill, and you're looking at the bill and you see problems with it you understand what it looks like on the ground, you say, okay, how can we put it in a better position to make it make sense? And so that's where we work to try to figure out how to put it in a better position to make it make sense, and also not increase the amount of credits. And so that's why you see a difference between the two bills, and I know what it's like with a half credit. So we also made that adjustment too. And so what you have is a bill that was going to be very popular in the legislature, regardless of our work on it or not, that we feel like because it aligns to some of our beliefs, we're able to put it in a more practicable posture. But I will look at what you're, yes, I will. Yeah.
You know, and I'm talking from we didn't have all this technology when I graduated high school, and I went away to college in Dallas, and I didn't know how to write a check. So somebody had to teach me, you know, I had my first checking account, how to write a check. People don't write checks anymore, but you know.
I should admit it, I don't know how health insurance works still, so.
Yeah, okay. So I understand the need for a lot of this in today's world because it's much more, kids are getting, you know, free credit everywhere and they don't even realize how to even pay that.
I'm gonna look at that.
Yeah, please do.
Similar to,
Question.
sorry, go ahead.
Well, in pertaining, Dr. Bromley, in regards to.
Ms. Holloway, pull your mic up, please.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
That's
I'm
okay.
sorry. I'd like clarification on this because there are two bills, and that's what's sort of confusing at times. Sometimes there's two or three, and et cetera. So Bill 118 was the first legislator that came forward, right?
Not necessarily.
Not necessarily.
It just depends on when it was filed.
So this fellow didn't come before to ask.
Representative Ilg did not ask the department about his bill before he filed it. That's the thing about the legislative process. They don't always tell us they're going to drop a bill. Representative Muscarello did come to us and ask for our assistance, and I need to have conversations with Representative Ilg about the impacts of his bill and what it'll do. I don't think he
I think that
understands.
clarifies it because I'm going, well, why wouldn't the department help this guy or this legislator? Did he hear out the suggestions and not want?
He did not reach out to us, and so I'm reaching out to him to try to get his bill in a similar posture if he wants to continue it to the Muscarello bill.
Okay, I don't want to speak for Representative Hill because I only met him one time
He's a
in
wonderful
forum
man.
and he talked about this recently.
Yeah, he's wonderful.
And he said that, very nice man, very, you know, sincere what he wants to do with this. And he said there was another legislator with the bill, they probably combined the two bills. He didn't know if his was the one that was going to pass, he just wanted to make sure of it. So I think they're in all those discussions.
And the draft
in
bill,
some-
the original draft bill is very similar from where they initially grabbed it. But we were working with Representative Muscarello before we even learned about I learned about Representative Hill's bill from him passing him in the hallway. And I'm like, oh, financial literacy, we're really excited about that. We've been working with Representative Muscarello. So then.
I think
then
it
was
helps
filed.
him and other legislators to understand the importance of the communication, collaboration of when they're writing a bill. And then it kind of.
Yeah, and
it's all this work.
he has really good intentions, you know that.
This is good.
He's a wonderful legislator from the Jefferson Parish area, and so we're happy to work with him on seeing how we can either marry the two bills or work with them.
Perfect.
Mr. Morris and then Dr. Davis.
Yeah, just following up on Superintendent Bochet's comments. Is this an off-the-shelf product that the department is recommending, or is this something that's subject to the district's interpretation to select a curriculum that satisfies the criteria? And then secondly, what kind of training or requirements are there for the educator to teach the class that's required?
So, yeah, it's open certification, so it's not just math. The other thing about it is curriculum decisions are made at the local level, so they could decide what curriculum as long as they cover the topics that are listed in law. There are a few programs out there that I believe are just off the shelf. Some are even free in some instances, but it would require the local districts to determine what curriculum they like to use.
And I have already been contacted by a half dozen people who have a program to help systems if this were to pass. So, I mean, there are people nationally looking at this. And so I think that superintendents across the state will be contacted should this pass.
I also think some districts have this. I feel like my students have access to financial lit. I don't know if it necessarily covers everything that's in the law, but in some places it's not going to be new.
We incorporate some of these things in financial math that we call it
Okay.
The
financial
jump
math.
start.
In that jumpstart pathway,
Okay.
but
That
it's
might
not
be what I'm
every kid, not every kid takes that course.
Okay. All right, Dr. Davis. Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Morris.
Just close out my comment. I'm not plugging anything here, but I taught a Quest for Success class last week in the Stitcher Parish, so I'm assuming it's something along those lines, but I was just curious, you know, if you guys had something in mind that's off the shelf, or, you know, kind of going back to Superintendent Boche's comment, if you have these things that are already in place, is there any way that to satisfy the criteria if it's integrated into what is already existing, or does it have to be a brand new class?
It would have to be a class specifically on financial literacy. It could not be integrated.
Got it, thank you.
Dr. Davis.
You mean to satisfy?
To satisfy the legislation. Currently, you have a mandate on the books to incorporate certain topics of financial literacy into existing curriculum. So I believe it's currently in our civics standards and in civics across the state, but this would require, proposed legislation will require a standalone class that covered a very deeper content area of financial literacy.
So we're not double dipping here?
No, because they're removing the existing law. So they're repealing the existing law that would require it to be infused into other courses, and this will be the standalone course that we use.
Great, okay, thank you.
So my question pertains to the curriculum. So because this is not associated with any kind of LEAP test, the department would not have a Tier 1 curriculum for this. And so my question it's based on the fact that I understand it can get complicated if you get too specific in legislative statute about what has to be included. But I would like to figure out a way to make sure that when districts are teaching this class, when they talk about managing debt, that they're including payday loans, which are a huge source of incredible financial stress. And then also there's a new thing, I don't know if y'all are aware, these delay pay things that also are being utilized by individuals that are making less than $50,000 a year and are also young people. And so it's an app that you download that allows you to delay your payments and spread them out over time, but because it's not a credit card, it's not regulated in the same way. And so I want to make sure that we're kind of covering those kinds of issues because they specifically target young people when they're most vulnerable and lacking knowledge.
Yes, ma'am. And then also we would be producing course guidance on these items. And then BESE can always, like I mentioned earlier, put even more restrictions on top of the law. So if the law requires these things, you can require within that these specific topics be covered by predatory loan.
Okay, great, thank you.
Okay, so moving on to the last one of our package, I didn't expect it to go this long, is House Bill 121 by Representative Hamadeh dealing with schools. This would require a 15-minute recess for K-5 schools, at least 15 minutes. It's one that pops up every now and then in the legislature. We get quizzed about it all the time. Dr. Brumman, when he visits, they're like, why don't you love recess? So we think it's very important for the well-being and health of students in those early grades to have opportunities to have free play with supervision, of course. So that is a requirement that we are seeking in this legislation.
Ms. Lawson, just a quick question. Looking at the bill, it looks like it strikes through the language that talks about the instructional minutes.
The exception for instructional.
And then it creates a new statute. So you would still have to have the same amount of instruction. So this would be adding at least 15 minutes.
It would not add to the day, so if you were to utilize, because it strikes through that instructional minute
That means you
mark,
can count recess.
you can count
count
this 15 minute in the K through 5, just 15 minutes of the K through 5 program as instructional.
So if you had the school elected to have a 30-minute recess, 15 minutes of it could be applied as instructional, if you wanted to add the other 15.
It would have to be in addition to the school day. But all that's being required in this legislation is 15 minutes for K through 5 schools. That's it.
Do we have a sense of how many schools don't already have this in place?
No, but you can blame me. I love recess, and you can directly blame me for this bill. I think kids need recess. You know, we talk a lot about mental health issues and well-being issues and trauma, and I just believe that one of the ways to help work through that is having supervised, structured, or unstructured free play. And most schools do this already, but in the event that they didn't, they would just put it into play where they would have to do that. And I don't, to Mr. Mellon, you actually brought up a really good point. We didn't want a situation where, you know, a school has to go in and add 2 weeks of school time because they added 15 minutes of this. So in K-5 only, it allows this to count for part of their day.
I'm looking at my legislative brief to see if I have any data on that. So in 2022-23 school year, 79% of schools reported providing at least a 30-minute moderate to rigorous physical activity daily. 45% reported at least 30 minutes of recess during each school day. So 45% of schools reported that they did have a recess. And that was out of 829 out of 1385 public and charter schools.
Dr. Davis.
So I'm channeling my inner Caroline Romer that y'all probably didn't know I had. Does this apply to charter schools? I don't think she's here today.
It does not.
Because that's what she's going to ask.
It does not apply to charter schools currently the way it is, because we want, one of the guidelines was to respect their autonomy, because they have certain autonomies in the law. So it does not apply to charter schools currently. Okay.
Just keep going.
All right, and so I don't know what just happened, but looking at this, thank you so much. We have concluded our legislative package, and we're on that final slide for the next agenda item, which I'll probably sit here for another 3 hours, is just an overview of what we're going into. So LDE BESE tracking, we're tracking currently 69 pre-filed bills. Like I said, this will increase with resolutions. We will have a lot of resolutions, as we always do. So this number will go up, and they go through the process just like a normal bill does. So we'll have to talk in committee on them, all those things. I broke down the bills that were filed, if you're looking at your tracker in front of you, into some main bill topics for this year. Dr. Bofi asked me to do this. I think it's actually a great exercise to be able to break it into those main categories so we see what a legislative session looks like. This year, the main topics are academics and curriculum, so any kind of changes to the way we teach or what we teach. Agency and governmental operations, so that includes local school systems, the department, or any of those type of governmental operations things. Educator workforce, obviously a big one. Fiscal bills, the ones that impact finances. School choice, because we have a good bit on that front. School safety, obviously, is a huge discussion topic right now. We have several bills on that, so we have school safety. We also have student well-being, so that recess bill would fall into this, because we have several that deal with like mental health and the health of students. And then finally, the catch-all, which is miscellaneous bills, which is the ones that just don't fall into a category. We didn't have enough to create its own category. You'll see in your bill tracker, you have the main category headings, and then you have the subject. This is what the legislature deems a topic. They're to no certain order in my understanding. I'm sure they have a process over there of how they do it, but that is just the top area the legislature assigns to it. The areas I did were based off of what we know our critical goals around and the priorities of both BESE and the department. So this is the end of my slideshow. Thank y'all if you have any questions.
So I propose that we take a break for lunch, so we have I think it's a box lunch today. How much time would you like, members, for your lunch break? 30 minutes? Okay, I hear 30. Any objection to that? No. Is there any objection to the motion that we just heard? Receiving, I think it's receiving a report. Any objection to that? Hearing none, motion passes. So we'll take a 30-minute break for lunch. So why don't we just say 12:15? So we'll start back at 12:15. Thank you.
Come on, 2 hours.